Here is a really successful student project, which allows me to nitpick a bit. So things are looking really good. The lighting is great. The keys are solid. This student used a 3-pass method to do the core, edge, and roto type approach. It's really successful, just even looking at the still frames. The only quibble I have is with the blend between our character here and the background. And that's particularly the case in this first shot. So I'm going to use this one to demonstrate. So we have a matte line over here where the shirt is in front of a brighter background. But it is a really good matte. If I just solo it, it's really a good quality matte. So we don't need to blow this thing up. We just need to solve that problem. The student also added an adjustment layer, which was a very curious method. It's an alpha matte, and the alpha of the shot above is done with opacity and some curves adjustments. And so I think that was partially an attempt to mitigate the situation, and it does work somewhat. As you know, the fast shortcut, which has usually some unintended consequences, is to apply Refine Hard Matte. And I'll just go in here and I'll tab through and zero out all the top controls, turn off motion blur. And now if we just compare the result, that is helping get rid of that matte line. It's also getting rid of some other detail here and there. If we take a look at just the matte, sometimes it's in areas where we want this, sometimes it's in areas like the hair where we don't. We've seen other cases, I've demonstrated this before, where it may or may not be what you want, and it's not completely solving the problem here. It is helping. We could increase decontamination, which means increasing the area that it's affecting, but that also could lead to more unintended consequences. And those consequences are usually different parts of the image bleeding over into itself in some automated way that looks very unnatural. So if I were applying that one, I would be looking carefully for whether there's any glitching. Okay, enough said about that. Let's look at what I think is a little bit more elegant approach, and one that will seem like a lot of trouble, but maybe it's not. So I'm going to duplicate this matted layer. So again, this is the layer that I have a really nice alpha channel on. And I'll even rename it Edge Matte. What I'm going to do is remove the effects that are here, because I don't care about color on this one. And in fact, I'm going to go into the channel menu and choose Shift Channels. Alpha will now be full on, and red, green, and blue are going to be from alpha. And what that allows me to do is now apply one of the very oldest effects, not only in After Effects, but even in Photoshop, and one that most people don't even know why it's there. And that is the Stylize Find Edges tool. Now, people will apply this to an RGB image, and it looks like kind of what digital art looked like in 1990. That's because nobody knew what this was for, and they put it even in the Stylize menu because that's what it seems like it's for, just give you this weird effect. But in fact, remember that Photoshop was invented by Thomas and John Knoll. John Knoll now runs ILM as I record this, and there's no coincidence that this is actually really good at just selecting edges. So look at that. I've got this nice Luma matte, and all I need now is an adjustment layer right below it, and this is going to be a blur, and I'm going to set the layer above as a Luma matte. We don't want to solo this, and now I'm just going to use a plain old Gaussian blur. And now as I raise this up to a pretty high level, what I'm actually doing is not just blurring the edge, but blurring the edge and the background together. And that's doing a couple things. It's giving me kind of a natural light wrap, and it's creating this kind of wash between the foreground and background. So now I don't have as much of a complaint about that matte line. I can push this really far if I want to. I don't know that I want to go that far. The other thing, as I mentioned, is just to go into the background and blur it a bit more. And again, fast box blur, great choice for this deep background kind of blurring. Now, you may not like the look of that on a still image, so you might want to go for something you like, but I encourage you to push it a bit, somewhere in there. And with this edge matte trick, there are ways to even expand this out. There's an effect, if I go to my effects and presets, called Minimax. And it works specifically with luminance. With a maximum on the color channel, I can expand it out. Now, that very quickly goes real blocky, so you want to just subtly use this thing. And then, of course, on top of that, you could blur it a little bit. But if we go back, now we're influencing a larger range, and we might not need it even as much blur now. So this is the game. And I think that that eliminates the matte line and gives me more believability with his natural depth of field and that of background. And I might push that background even a little bit harder. To call out some really nice additional work, this student decided to do volumetric lights on the headlights. Unfortunately, the element that was used is missing from what was uploaded, which actually lets me nitpick here. This thing should go all the way off the frame, and I'm not totally sure about the angle, but it's a nice touch regardless. Usually you only get God rays when there's a lot of dust. This scene doesn't seem particularly dusty, but who am I to nitpick that? And, oh wait, that's my job. And also the shadow casting in this case is really nice because the car even is having some of the same directionality as their long shadow here, right? If the shadow's directly below the car and they're casting a long shadow, that's not consistent. And then if I preview this, there's some extras. So we've got an animated title with sound effects and a horse animation. Now, I'm not going to critique the horse animation because A, awesome that you wanted to do it, and so what if he's on some strange drug that makes him walk sideways? I don't mind.